Across the stars, a scream for help echoed, desperate, terrified, and ignored. One by one, the great powers of the galaxy turned their backs. The threat was too ancient, too ruthless, too impossible. But one world answered, not out of duty, not for glory, but because on Earth, survival isn't a choice, it's a way of life. They begged for heroes. What they got were death. Well, there's the desperate place. Crystal spires of Lyra Prime gleamed like jewels beneath twin suns, their surfaces reflecting the gentle waves of the vast oceans that covered 90% of the planet. For 3 millennia, the Lyrian Confederation had built their civilization in harmony with their aquatic world, creating floating cities that rose and fell with the tides. Their society was a masterpiece of peaceful cooperation, where conflict was resolved through meditation and consensus rather than violence. Ambassador Coral Thawne stood on the highest observation deck of the central spire, her iridescent blue skin rippling with patterns that expressed deep concern. The graceful Lyrian's gill slits fluttered as she watched the horizon, where dark clouds had begun to gather. But these were not natural storm clouds. They moved with purpose, consuming everything in their path and leaving only empty void behind. The void swarm had arrived at Lyra Prime. 3 days earlier, the first reports had come from the outer settlements. Strange organisms had emerged from the deep space between stars, creatures that defied classification. They moved in vast clouds, consuming organic matter with terrifying efficiency. Entire floating cities had vanished in hours. Their populations, either devoured or transformed into something unrecognizable. Coralthon activated the emergency communication array, her webbed fingers dancing across the bioluminescent controls. The message she was about to send would reach every member world of the Galactic Union, but she held little hope. The Void Swarm had appeared in 12 different systems over the past century, and each time the result had been the same: complete annihilation of all life. "This is Ambassador Coralthon of the Lyrian Confederation," she began, her melodic voice carrying across the subspace frequencies. "We are under attack by the entity known as the Void Swarm. Our defenses have proven useless against their advance. They have consumed 30% of our planet's biomass in 72 hours. She paused, watching as another distant city spire flickered and went dark. "We formally request immediate military assistance from any member nation capable of providing aid. Our population of 2 billion souls faces extinction. Please, if there is any mercy in the galaxy, send help." The response came within hours, but it was not what Coralthon had hoped to hear. One by one, the great military powers of the galaxy declined to intervene. The Altarian Defense Fleet cited insufficient resources. The Centauri Federation declared the situation beyond current tactical capabilities. The mighty Andromedan Empire simply stated unacceptable risk factors. Each refusal felt like another nail in Lyra Prime's coffin. On the bridge of the battlecruiser, Righteous Fury, Admiral Kethfer of the Andromedan Empire reviewed the Lyrian plea with cold calculation. The massive aliens for arms gestured dismissively. As he addressed his staff, "The Void Swarm has never been defeated. Every civilization that has encountered them has been consumed. We cannot risk our fleets in a hopeless gesture." "What about the newer species, Admiral?" asked his tactical officer. "The humans submitted an application for Union membership last year. Perhaps they would be willing to attempt a rescue mission." Admiral Kethfer's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Humans, those primitive Deathworlders, they barely qualify as a spacefaring species. Their home world is listed as Class 12 hostile environment. Most civilized beings would die within hours of exposure to their atmosphere." The tactical officer consulted his data files. "Their application indicates they have some military capability. Admiral, they've been fighting constant wars on their planet for millennia." "Constant warfare indicates barbarism, not military competence," Kethfer replied dismissively. "Besides, what could a single ship from such a primitive species accomplish against the Void Swarm? It would be suicide." But word of the Lyrian crisis had indeed reached Earth, and in the halls of the United Earth Command, a very different conversation was taking place. Commander Elena Vasquez stood before the holographic display showing the devastation at Lyra Prime, her dark eyes reflecting both horror and determination. The veteran officer had spent 15 years fighting in the asteroid mining conflicts and the Martian independence wars, but she had never seen destruction on this scale. "The Galactic Union has officially declared the Lyrian system a lost cause," reported Dr. Marcus Chen, the expedition's chief xenobiologist. The slight scientist adjusted his glasses as he read from his tablet. 17 different military organizations have declined to provide assistance. The consensus is that intervention would result in total fleet loss with no possibility of success. Sergeant Riley Thompson looked up from his equipment check, his weathered face skeptical. "Sounds like the kind of mission Command loves to volunteer us for. When do we leave?" Commander Vasquez appreciated Thompson's dry humor, but the situation was far from amusing. The Lyrian distress call had reached Earth at the worst possible time. Humanity was still rebuilding after the devastating climate wars, and the Terra Nova was their only deep space vessel capable of interstellar travel. committing their single advanced ship to a rescue mission that every other civilization had deemed hopeless seemed like madness. The decision has been made at the highest levels, Vasquez announced. Earth will respond to the Lyrian plea for assistance. We depart in 6 hours. Dr. Chen looked up from his research with concern etched across his features. Commander, with respect, we're talking about an entity that has consumed entire star systems. What can we possibly do that the Andromedan Empire cannot? Thompson cleaned his rifle with practiced efficiency, his expression thoughtful. Doc, you ever been in a firefight with Martian insurgents in a toxic atmosphere storm? Of course not, Chen replied, confused by the apparent non-sequitur. Neither have the Andromedans, Thompson said simply. Sometimes experience matters more than firepower. Commander Vasquez nodded her agreement. The Void Swarm has faced civilized species that fight with energy weapons and defensive strategies. They've never encountered humans who grew up in environments that actively try to kill them every day. The Terra Nova launched from Earth's orbital shipyard with a crew of 30 specialists. To outside observers, it would have seemed laughably inadequate for the mission ahead. The ship itself was a hybrid of human engineering and salvaged alien technology, built for exploration rather than warfare. Its crew consisted of scientists, engineers, and a small security detachment led by Sergeant Thompson. But appearances could be deceiving. As the Terra Nova entered hyperspace, Dr. Chen briefed the crew on what they knew about the Void Swarm. They appear to be a collective organism, possibly silicon-based, that feeds on organic compounds. They reproduce by converting existing biomass into more of themselves. No known weapon has proven effective against their adaptive defensive capabilities. Which about biological weapons? Asked Thompson. Chen shook his head. Every civilization that's attempted biological warfare has failed. The swarm appears to be immune to toxins, diseases, and parasites that affect carbon-based life. What about toxins and parasites that affect silicon-based life? Commander Vasquez asked quietly. The question hung in the air as Chen considered the implications. We don't have much data on that approach. Most civilized species consider biological warfare ethically unacceptable. Thompson's expression was grim. Lucky for the Lyrians, we're not civilized. 3 days into their journey, they received an update from Lyra Prime that chilled everyone aboard. The Void Swarm had accelerated their consumption rate. 60% of the planet's biomass was gone, and the remaining population had retreated. To the few heavily shielded underwater cities, they had perhaps a week before complete planetary sterilization. We need to move faster, Vasquez muttered. Watching the tactical displays, Chief Engineer Sarah Park looked up from her console. I can push the hyperdrive to 110%, but it'll stress the containment systems. We might not have enough power for weapons if we need them. Do it, Vasquez ordered. We're not much use if we arrive after everyone's dead. As the Terra Nova pushed beyond its design specifications, racing across the galaxy toward a dying world, the crew prepared for what many assumed would be their final mission. They checked weapons that seemed primitive by galactic standards, reviewed tactics that most civilized species would consider barbaric, and steeled themselves for combat against an enemy that had never been defeated. Dr. Chen spent his time reviewing Earth's biological databases, searching for organisms that might affect silicon-based life forms. What he found in the deepest archives of human scientific research would have horrified most galactic citizens. Humanity had cataloged thousands of extremophile organisms, bacteria and viruses that thrived in conditions that would kill any other known life form. Commander Chen called out as he made a disturbing discovery. I think I know why the galactic community is so afraid of Earth. Vasquez joined him at his research station. What did you find? Chen pulled up a holographic display showing microscopic organisms. These are archaebacteria from Earth's deep thermal vents. They metabolize sulfur compounds and can survive in temperatures exceeding 400 degrees Celsius. But more importantly, they secrete compounds that are highly corrosive to silicon-based materials. You're suggesting we weaponize bacteria? Vasquez asked. I'm suggesting that Earth's hostile environment might be exactly what we need to fight an enemy that's adapted to civilized weapons, Chen replied. The Void Swarm has never encountered organisms that evolved in the kind of conditions we call normal. Sergeant Thompson joined the conversation, his tactical mind already working through the implications. How do we deploy something like that? Chen's response was interrupted by proximity alarms as the Terra Nova dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Lyra system. What they saw on the main screen silenced every conversation aboard the ship. Lyra Prime was dying. The beautiful blue-green, the world they had seen in the Lyrian cultural databases, was now covered in spreading patches of absolute darkness. The Void Swarm moved across the planet's surface like a living shadow, consuming everything organic and leaving behind only sterile rock. The few remaining Lyrian cities glowed like dying embers beneath the water, their defensive shields the only thing standing between 2 billion souls and complete annihilation. My God, whispered Dr. Chen. Commander Vasquez studied the tactical display with professional detachment, but her hands trembled slightly as she processed the scale of destruction. Communications. Try to raise the Lyrian government. Let them know help has arrived. The response came immediately, and Ambassador Coralthon's image appeared on the main screen. The elegant Lyrian looked exhausted, her skin patterns flickering with barely controlled panic. "This is Commander Vasquez of the Earth vessel Terra Nova," Vasquez announced. "We're here to assist with your evacuation and to attempt containment of the Void Swarm." Coralthon's expression shifted from hope to confusion. "Commander, we appreciate your bravery, but surely you understand the magnitude of what you're facing. The Void Swarm has consumed civilizations far more advanced than a bunch of primitive death," Thompson asked with dark humor. Coralthon's patterns shifted with embarrassment. "I did not mean to imply." "No offense taken," Vasquez interrupted. "Ambassador, we need you to gather as much information as possible about the swarm's behavior, patterns, feeding habits, and defensive capabilities. We're going to try something that's never been attempted before." "What do you intend to do?" Coralthon asked. Commander Vasquez looked at her crew, seeing determination reflected in every face. These were people who had grown up on a world that tried to kill them daily, who had survived plagues, toxic storms, and radiation exposure that would have wiped out most galactic species. They were about to face an enemy that had never lost a battle, armed with weapons that most civilizations considered too dangerous to use. "We're going to show the Void Swarm what happens when it tries to eat a Deathworld," she said simply. Into the abyss the Terra Nova descended through Lyra Prime's atmosphere under heavy stealth protocols, its hull singing with the stress of rapid atmospheric entry. Commander Vasquez watched the tactical displays as they approached New Tidal City, one of the last remaining Lyrian strongholds. The underwater metropolis was protected by powerful energy shields, but even those defenses were beginning to fail. Under the constant pressure of the Void Swarm's assault through the viewports, the crew could see the true horror of what they were facing. The Void Swarm moved like a living darkness across the ocean's surface, individual organisms the size of aircraft weaving together in complex patterns. When they encountered organic matter, they would engulf it completely, breaking down molecular bonds and incorporating the raw materials into their own expanding mass. "Sensors are reading massive bioelectric activity," reported Dr. Chen from his science station. "The individual organisms appear to be in constant communication with each other. It's like watching a single massive brain thinking." Sergeant Thompson studied the enemy formations through his tactical scope. "Never seen anything move like that. They're coordinated, but not in any pattern one recognizes. No obvious command structure, no apparent weak points." The Terra Nova touched down on one of New Tidal City's emergency landing platforms, just as the Void Swarm launched another assault against the city's outer defenses. The humans watched in fascination and horror as thousands of the creatures threw themselves against the energy barriers, testing for weaknesses with methodical precision. Ambassador Coralthon met them at the airlock, accompanied by a small group of Lyrian officials. Up close, the stress of the siege was obvious in their rapidly shifting skin patterns and the constant tremor in their gill slits. "Commander Buscus, thank you for coming, though I fear you may have arrived only to share our fate." "Not if we can help it," Vasquez replied, shouldering her equipment pack. "We need to see the swarm up close, study their behavior patterns and weaknesses." The Lyrian officials exchanged glances of despair. "Commander, with respect, we have been studying them for 4 days. They appear to have no weaknesses. Their adaptive capabilities are beyond anything we have encountered." Dr. Chun activated his portable scanner, immediately beginning to collect data on the local environment. "Have you tried biological warfare? Toxins? Diseases? Parasites?" "Of course," replied Dr. Veltar, the Lyrian chief scientist. "We deployed every biological agent in our arsenal. The swarm consumed them and incorporated their molecular structure into their own defenses. They became stronger." Thompson was checking his weapons when something caught his attention. "Doc, you getting readings on the water composition here?" Chen frowned as he studied his scanner. "That's unusual. The water has extremely high concentrations of sulfur compounds, heavy metals, and organic acids. By galactic standards, this environment would be considered moderately toxic, and by Earth standards," Vasquez asked. "Perfectly normal for a deep ocean thermal vent ecosystem," Chen replied with growing excitement. "Commander, I don't think the Lyrians understand what they're showing us." Ambassador Coralthon's patterns shifted with confusion. "I do not understand. Our ocean chemistry has always been stable and life-supporting." "For you," Thompson said, beginning to understand. "But you evolved here. You're adapted to these conditions. To most galactic species, your life-supporting environment would be a toxic hellscape." Dr. Chen was already running calculations on his portable laboratory. "Commander, I need to collect samples of the local bacteria and microorganisms. If my theory is correct, the Lyrians have been swimming in biological weapons their entire lives." Without realizing it, as if to emphasize the point, the city's defenses flickered under another swarm assault. Through the transparent aluminum windows, they could see hundreds of the dark creatures probing the energy barriers, their movements becoming more aggressive as they sensed the inhabitants beyond. "We need to move fast," Vasquez said. "How long Until those shields fail, perhaps 6 hours, Dr. Veltar replied grimly. After that, New Title City will fall like all the others. Thompson was studying the swarm's attack patterns when he noticed something that made him smile grimly. They're learning. Every assault is more coordinated than the last, but they're also making assumptions. What kind of assumptions? Vasquez asked. They expect their prey to behave like every other species they've encountered. Defensive positions, energy, weapons, predictable tactics. Thompson's expression was predatory. They've never fought someone willing to get their hands dirty. Over the next 2 hours, Dr. Chen worked with growing excitement to analyze the local ecosystem. What he found confirmed his most optimistic projections. Lyra Prime's oceans were teeming with extremophile organisms that had evolved to thrive in the planet's unique chemistry. More importantly, many of these organisms secreted compounds that were highly corrosive to silicon-based materials. Commander, I think we have our weapon, Chen announced, his eyes bright with scientific discovery. The Lyrians have been living in symbiosis with bacteria that could dissolve the Void Swarm's molecular structure. Ambassador Coralthon's patterns shifted with disbelief. You're suggesting that our ocean life could defeat the swarm? That's impossible. They've been feeding in our waters for days. They've been feeding on large-scale organic matter, Chen explained. Fish, plants, the Lyrians themselves. But they've been ignoring the microscopic life because it doesn't register as significant biomass. They don't realize they're swimming in their own poison. Vasquez felt the first stirring of real hope since arriving at Lyra Prime. How do we weaponize it? Chen's response was interrupted by proximity alarms as the Void Swarm suddenly changed tactics. Instead of probing the shields methodically, they began a coordinated mass assault. Thousands of creatures threw themselves against the energy barrier simultaneously, causing dangerous fluctuations in the defensive grid. They're adapting faster than we anticipated, Dr. Veltar said with panic in his voice. The shields will fail within the hour. Thompson was already moving toward the airlock. Time for Plan B, we take the fight to them. Sergeant, that's suicide, Coralthon protested. No one can survive direct contact with the swarm. Thompson's smile was cold. Ambassador, with respect, you have no idea what humans can survive. What followed was a demonstration of human adaptability that would be talked about in Lyrian historical records for generations. Thompson and his security team deployed into the toxic waters surrounding New Title City, using breathing apparatus and protective suits that would have killed most galactic species through contamination alone. But humans had evolved on a world where toxic exposure was a daily reality. Their equipment was designed not just to survive hostile environments, but to function effectively in them. As the Void Swarm moved to attack these new targets, they discovered that their usual absorption techniques were ineffective against enemies. Protected by technology forged in Earth's deadliest ecosystems, Thompson's rifle fired projectiles that had been soaked in concentrated Lyrian bacterial cultures. Each shot delivered a payload of extremophile organisms directly into the swarm, creature's molecular structure. The effect was immediate and devastating. The targeted organisms began to dissolve from the inside out as the bacteria went to work on their silicon-based components. It's working, Chen shouted from his monitoring station. The bacterial payload is spreading through their communication networks. Each infected organism is passing the contamination to others in the collective. But the swarm was learning, adapting with terrifying speed. Within minutes, they began to develop resistance to the bacterial attack, their molecular structure shifting to compensate for the new threat. They're adapting, Vasquez observed grimly. We need to escalate. Dr. Chen was already ahead of her, working frantically at his portable laboratory. I'm modifying the bacterial strain, introducing genetic sequences from Earth's most aggressive externophiles, but I need more time. Time they didn't have. The Void Swarm was beginning to focus their attention on the human interlopers. Recognizing them as a significant threat for the first time, massive formations of the creatures began converging on Thompson's position, moving with deadly purpose. Sergeant, you need to fall back, Vasquez ordered. Thompson's response came over the communication channel with typical.com. Negative, Commander. If we pull back now, they'll have time to fully adapt. We need to keep the pressure on. What happened next demonstrated why humans were feared throughout the galaxy by those few species that understood their true nature. Instead of retreating in the face of overwhelming odds, Thompson's team began using tactics that most civilized species would consider unthinkable. They deployed chemical weapons derived from Earth's most toxic environments. They used biological agents that had been banned by every galactic treaty. Most shockingly, they began using themselves as delivery systems, allowing the swarm to partially absorb them before detonating explosive charges that spread contaminated material throughout the collective network. My God, whispered Ambassador Coralthon, as she watched the human soldiers sacrifice themselves to save a species they had known for less than a day. They're not just warriors, they single quotes re. She struggled to find words in her language for what she was witnessing. They're Deathworlders, Dr. Veltar said quietly. This is what it means to evolve in hell. The tide of battle began to turn as enhanced bacterial strains spread through the Void Swarm's network faster than they could adapt. The creatures that had consumed entire civilizations were now being consumed and turned by organisms so small they barely registered on sensors. But victory came at a cost. Thompson's team had been reduced to half strength, and the swarm was preparing for a final desperate assault on New Title City. Their collective intelligence had recognized that the humans represented an existential threat, and they were willing to sacrifice everything to eliminate this new enemy. Commander, Thompson's voice crackled over the communication system. We've bloodied their nose, but they're regrouping for a final push. You need to get those people evacuated now. Vasquez looked at the tactical display showing thousands of Void Swarm creatures massing for an attack that would overwhelm even their enhanced defenses. The human team had bought them time and proven that the swarm could be defeated, but the cost was becoming clear. All civilian population to evacuation stations, she ordered. Prepare for emergency departure. But as she watched the swarm formations gathering in the toxic waters above them, Commander Vasquez realized that evacuation alone would not be enough. The Void Swarm would simply follow them to whatever world offered sanctuary, spreading their infection throughout the galaxy. The only way to save the Lyrians was to destroy the swarm completely, and Elena Vasquez was beginning to understand exactly how to do it. The Deathworld solution, the central core of New Title City, pulsed with emergency lighting as Commander Vasquez assembled the combined human and Lyrian leadership for what she knew would be their final strategic meeting. Through the reinforced windows, they could see the Void Swarm massing in formations that defied comprehension, their dark shapes blotting out what little sunlight penetrated the ocean depths. The bacterial weapon has slowed their advance, but they're adapting faster than we can modify our approach, Dr. Chen reported, his face grim with exhaustion. At current rates of evolution, they'll develop complete immunity within 12 hours. Ambassador, Coralthan's skin patterns flickered with despair. Then we have failed. The evacuation ships can carry perhaps 10% of our population, the rest will perish when the city's defenses collapse. Sergeant Thompson's voice crackled over the communication system from his forward position. Commander, whatever you're planning, you better do it soon. I count at least 50,000 individual organisms in the primary assault formation. We can't hold them off much longer. Vasquez studied the holographic display showing the planet's current status. 90% of Lyra Prime's surface biomass had been consumed, leaving behind a scarred wasteland that would take millennia to recover. The Void Swarm had grown exponentially during their feeding, their collective intelligence becoming more sophisticated with each absorbed civilization, but Elena Vasquez had grown up on a world where impossible odds were simply another day at the office. Dr. Chen, she said quietly, tell me about Earth's Permian extinction event. Chen looked confused by the apparent non sequitur. The Great Dying, it was the largest mass extinction in Earth's history. Volcanic activity released massive amounts of hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, and other toxic compounds. 96% of marine species went extinct. But some survived, Vasquez continued. The organisms that thrived in toxic high-temperature environments, the extremophiles that eventually gave rise to much of Earth's current biodiversity. Understanding dawned in Chun's eyes. You want to trigger an artificial extinction event. Void Swarm has adapted to every conventional weapon, every biological agent, every tactic that civilized species have used against them, Vasquez explained. But they've never faced a planet that actively fights back. Dr. Veltar Centicles writhed with agitation. Commander, you're suggesting we poison our own world? Even if it destroys the swarm, Lyra Prime would become uninhabitable. Not uninhabitable, Chen said, his scientific mind already working through the implications. Uninhabitable for current life forms, but the extremophile organisms that would thrive in that environment would eventually restore the ecological balance. It would take time, perhaps centuries, but the planet would recover. Thompson's voice cut through their debate with characteristic bluntness. Folks, I hate to interrupt the science lesson, but we've got about 30 minutes before they overrun our position. Whatever you're planning, now would be good. Vasquez made her decision with the cold calculation that had carried her through 15 years of impossible missions. Dr. Chen, how long to prepare a planetary-scale deployment of your most aggressive bacterial strains? To cover the entire ocean system. 6 hours minimum, assuming we use the city's atmospheric processors. As delivery systems, you have 30 minutes? Vasquez replied. Sergeant Thompson, fall back to the city. We're going to make our stand here. What followed was the most desperate scientific endeavor in Lyrian history. Dr. Chen worked with superhuman intensity, modifying his bacterial cultures while Vasquez coordinated the evacuation of essential personnel. The Lyrian scientists, despite their philosophical objections to biological warfare, threw themselves into the effort with the desperation of a species facing extinction. I'm introducing genetic sequences from every extremophile organism in Earth's database, Chen muttered as he worked. Self-reducing bacteria, thermoacidophiles, organisms that thrive in radiation levels that would sterilize most planets. If this works, we'll turn Lyra Prime into a toxic hellscape that only the most resilient life forms can survive. Ambassador Coralthon watched the preparations with a mixture of horror and fascination. You're asking us to sacrifice our world to save our people? I'm asking you to trust that life finds a way, Vasquez replied. Earth has survived multiple extinction events. Each time the survivors were stronger and more adaptable than what came before. The Void Swarm's final assault began as Chen made his last modifications to the bacterial weapon. Thousands of the creatures threw themselves against New Tidal City's failing defenses. Their collective intelligence focused entirely on eliminating the threat that humanity represented. Thompson and his remaining team fought with the desperate courage of soldiers who knew they were making their last stand. Their weapons fired continuously, each shot delivering payloads of modified bacteria that bought precious seconds as the infected organisms died and passed the contamination through the swarm's network. Defensive perimeter is collapsing, Thompson reported, his voice steady despite the impossible odds. They're breaking through on multiple levels. Chen, status report, Vasquez demanded. Bacterial modification complete, Chen announced. But we need to deploy it directly into the swarm's central concentration. The atmospheric processors won't provide sufficient saturation. Vasquez looked at the tactical display showing the massive concentration of void swarm organisms surrounding the city. To deploy the weapon effectively, someone would have to carry it directly into the heart of the enemy formation. It would be a one-way mission. I'll take it. Thompson's voice came over the communication system. Negative, Sergeant. You're needed for defensive operations. Commander, with respect, I'm the only one here with experience in hostile environment operations. Besides, his voice carried a note of dark humor. Someone needs to make sure these things know they picked the wrong Deathworlders to mess with. Before Vasquez could respond, proximity alarms screamed as the void swarm breached the city's outer defenses. The creatures poured through the gaps like a dark tide, their forms shifting and adapting as they encountered each new obstacle. Alt personnel to emergency stations, Vasquez ordered. Prepare for close combat. What followed was unlike any battle in recorded galactic history. The humans fought with weapons and tactics that most civilized species would consider primitive barbarism. They used chemical weapons, biological agents, and explosive devices that had been banned by every interstellar treaty. But more than their weapons, it was their attitude that shocked the watching Lyrians. These humans fought as if they were personally offended by the Void Swarm's existence. They used their own bodies as weapons, sacrificing themselves without hesitation to protect alien civilians. They had known for less than a week. Dr. Chen watched in amazement as Thompson fought his way through the enemy formation, carrying the biological weapon toward the swarm's central mass. The sergeant moved like a man possessed, his protective suit already compromised by toxic exposure that would have killed most galactic species in minutes. 30 seconds to deployment point, Thompson reported, his voice distorted by environmental damage to his communication system. Sergeant, you need to evacuate, Vasquez ordered. The bacterial spread will be exponential once you trigger the device. Thompson's response was cut off by static, but his intentions were clear as he reached the heart of the Void Swarm formation. The biological weapon detonated in a burst of invisible contamination that spread through the water with the efficiency that only microscopic life could achieve. The effect was immediate and devastating. The modified extremophile bacteria began consuming the Void Swarms silicon-based structure faster than the collective could adapt. Individual organisms died and passed the contamination to their neighbors, creating a cascade failure that spread through the entire network. But Chen's weapon was just the beginning. As the modified bacteria spread through Lyra Prime's ocean system, they began transforming the planet's entire ecosystem. Chemical processes that had been stable for millennia suddenly shifted into high gear, releasing compounds that would have been toxic to most galactic life forms. The entire ocean chemistry is changing, Dr. Veltar reported with awe. Hydrogen sulfide levels are increasing exponentially. Temperature is rising in the deep thermal vents. The planet is becoming uninhabitable. Ambassador Coralthon finished, her patterns shifting with complex emotions. No, Commander Vasquez corrected quietly. It's becoming Earth-like. The transformation of Lyra Prime accelerated beyond anyone's projections. The extremophile bacteria didn't just attack the Void Swarm, they fundamentally altered the planet's biochemistry, creating an environment so hostile that only the most adaptable organisms could survive. The beautiful aquatic paradise that had existed for millennia was being reborn as something far more dangerous. And the Void Swarm was dying. The collective intelligence that had consumed entire star systems found itself unable to adapt fast enough to the cascading environmental changes. Their silicon-based molecular structure, so effective against conventional weapons, became a fatal weakness in an ecosystem designed by evolution's harshest teacher. Swarm activity is dropping across all sectors, Dr. Chen reported with exhausted triumph. The bacterial cascade is achieving 98% kill rates. The few surviving organisms are showing signs of systemic breakdown. Through the observation windows, they could see the dark masses of void swarm creatures dissolving like shadows at sunrise. Where moments before there had been an unstoppable tide of destruction, now there was only the growing chemical chaos of a world in ecological transition. But victory had come at a price that would haunt the survivors for generations. Atmospheric processors showed toxic gas concentrations reaching critical levels. Dr. Veltar announced, "We have perhaps 4 hours before the surface becomes completely uninhabitable for Lyrian physiology." Ambassador Corolthan stood silently, watching her world transform into something alien and hostile. "We saved our people by sacrificing our planet. You saved your people by choosing to survive," Vasquez replied. "Planets can be terraformed. Ecosystems can be rebuilt. Extinct species don't get second chances." The evacuation proceeded with desperate efficiency as the remaining Lyrian population fled their dying paradise. Human and Lyrian personnel worked side by side, loading evacuation ships with everything necessary to preserve their civilization and culture. But as the ships lifted off from the increasingly toxic world, everyone understood that they were witnessing the end of an era. Dr. Chen remained behind with a small team of volunteers, monitoring the planetary transformation and documenting the process for future scientific study. What he observed would revolutionize galactic understanding of biological warfare and planetary engineering. "Commander, you need to see this," Chen called out, his voice filled with wonder. "The extremophile bacteria aren't just destroying the swarm, they're creating new ecological niches, new food webs based on chemosynthesis rather than photosynthesis. In 50 years, this planet could support life forms more diverse and resilient than anything that existed before." Vasquez joined him at the observation station, watching as thermal vents began erupting across the ocean floor. The water that had once been crystal clear was now rich with mineral compounds and organic acids that would nurture an entirely new kind of ecosystem. "It's like watching a planet being born," she murmured. "Or reborn," Chen corrected. "Commander, I think we've just demonstrated something that's going to terrify the galactic community. We've shown that Deathworld species don't just survive impossible conditions, we can create them." The implications of Chen's observation would indeed reshape galactic politics in the years to come. Word of humanity's victory over the Void Swarm spread throughout the galaxy with unprecedented speed, carrying with it a disturbing message: the primitive Deathworlders from the Outer Rim possessed capabilities that even the most advanced civilizations feared to use. 3 months later, Commander Vasquez stood in the reception hall of the Galactic Union headquarters, receiving formal recognition for her role in saving the Lyrian people. The ceremony was impressive, attended by representatives from dozens of species, but she could see the fear in their eyes when they looked at her. "The Union formally recognizes Earth's contribution to galactic security," Admiral Kethfer announced, his forearms gesturing with rigid formality. "However, we must also express concern about the methods employed. The biological weapons used at Lyra Prime violate several interstellar treaties." Ambassador Coralthon rose from her place among the Lyrian delegation, her skin patterns flickering. "With determination, with respect, Admiral. Those treaties were written by species that never faced extinction. Commander Vasquez and her people saved 2 billion lives, using methods that no one else was willing to employ. Perhaps our treaties need to reflect the reality that sometimes survival requires difficult choices." The debate that followed would continue for years, but the precedent had been set. Humanity had proven that their reputation as dangerous Deathworlders was well deserved, but they had also demonstrated that their violence was directed toward protecting the innocent rather than conquering the weak. 6 months after the Battle of Lyra Prime, Dr. Chen published his research on extremophile warfare, revolutionizing military science throughout the galaxy. His work included detailed protocols for using biological agents derived from Deathworld environments, techniques that most civilized species found too horrifying to contemplate. But buried in the appendix of his scientific papers was a more hopeful discovery. The Lyrian refugees, relocated to New Aquatica in the Centauri system, had begun to show remarkable adaptations to their new environment. Exposure to the extremophile bacteria during the evacuation had triggered genetic expressions that made them more resilient, more adaptable than their ancestors had been. "It's as if survival itself has become contagious," Chen wrote in his final report. "Contact with Deathworld organisms doesn't just defeat enemies, it strengthens allies." 1 year later, Elena Vasquez received an unexpected communication from the rebuilt Lyrian government. Ambassador Coralthon appeared on the screen, but her appearance had changed dramatically. Her skin patterns were more vibrant, her movements more confident, and behind her was a view of New Aquatica's growing cities. Commander Coralthon began, "I wanted to thank you personally for what your people did for us. But more than that, I wanted to show you something." The view shifted to show young Lyrians working in environments that would have killed their grandparents. They moved with easy confidence through chemical-rich waters, their gill slits processing compounds that previous generations would have found toxic. "We're stronger now," Coralthon continued, "not just as a people, but as a species. The children born since the evacuation show adaptations that our scientists never thought possible. They're becoming more like ... double quotes. She paused, searching for the right words. More like Deathworlders, Vasquez finished with a smile. Indeed. And we've decided that's exactly what the galaxy needs more of. The conversation was interrupted by priority alerts from across the Galactic communication network. Reports were coming in of a new threat emerging from the Galactic course, something even more dangerous than the Void Swarm. Entire star systems were going dark, their populations vanishing without trace. But for the first time in galactic history, the distress calls weren't met with despair and resignation. Instead, they were answered by a growing alliance of species that had learned a crucial lesson from the humans. Sometimes the best way to preserve civilization was to embrace the tools that civilization feared to use. Commander, Admiral Cuthbert's image appeared on the emergency channel, his rigid formality replaced by urgent desperation. We have a situation developing in the Omega sector. The Union formally requests immediate assistance from Earth's specialized forces. Vasquez looked at her crew, seeing the same grim determination that had carried them to victory at Lyra Prime. Behind them, Ambassador Coralthan's image nodded with fierce approval. Understood, Admiral, Vasquez replied. Earth's Deathworlders are on the way. As the Terra Nova prepared for another impossible mission, Elena Vasquez reflected on how much had changed since that first desperate journey to save the Lyrians. Humanity was no longer seen as primitive or barbaric by the galactic community. Instead, they were recognized for what they had always been, the species that others called when the situation was too dangerous for civilized solutions. The galaxy had learned to stop fearing Earth's children and start being grateful for them. And in the dark reaches of space, where new horrors waited to threaten innocent lives, that gratitude would prove to be humanity's greatest weapon. After all, someone had to be willing to do the jobs that civilized species couldn't handle. Someone had to be prepared to sacrifice paradise to save lives, to embrace the tools of destruction in service of creation. Someone had to be the monsters that other monsters feared, and Earth's Deathworlders were just getting started.